Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules today to participate in the Japan-US experts' presentation of proposals on shaping pragmatic and effective strategy toward China. My name is Shin-A Lee, a research fellow at SPF, and I'll be the MC for this session. We'd like to start straight away and have the moderator, Mr. Tsuneo Watanabe, Senior Fellow of SPF for the Security Studies Program, begin the forum with greetings and give an explanation of the purpose of the event. So, Mr. Watanabe, over to you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming and joining our session despite the snow. I am the Senior Fellow with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. My name is Tsuneo Watanabe. I would like to briefly explain the program we have. Shaping Pragmatic and Effective Strategy Toward China is the title of our program. We have experts on the economy as well as politics and security of Japan and the United States. We have experts on U.S. side as well as the Japanese side. We would like to have a comprehensive view of this program. We have deepened our debate on pragmatic and effective strategy. Now, after we have started this project, the COVID-19 that has erupted. Therefore, there was a delay in completing the recommendation because of the travel had been hampered. And even during that time, the competition between U.S. and China has become even fiercer. Now, in order to induce the China to abide by the international the rules, and with the building and enhancing the deterrence under Japan-US alliance, that alone will not be adequate enough. We need to have a comprehensive view of looking at what is happening not only in China, US, or Japan, but in the other countries and the other regions. Although we have seen the further strengthening of Japan-US alliance during that time, and that is quite beneficial, we have 8 in total for the members of the program up on the stage. But we have Professor Yamaguchi of the Kokusai Daigaku with us in the audience because we are too tight up on the stage. And Dr. Mireya Solis from the Brookings Institution was not able to attend. And also Mr. Nakamura, who is the visiting fellow at the SPF, because of the snow, he was not able to come here. But during the Q&A session, if there are any questions to Mr. Yamaguchi, he is here. Professor Yamaguchi is here in the audience, so he will directly respond to those the questions. Now, without further ado, I would like to ask the members up on the stage to start their presentation. 7 minutes each, starting from Professor Kojima. Thank you very much. My name is Kojima from the Faculty of Law of Keio University. It is indeed a great honor for a China specialist like myself. I am specializing on modern history as well as internal affairs of China to join in the group, which is filled with the security experts. It's rather daunting, and I am fully aware that I am not really an expert on security, but looked from a point of view of China specialist. How should we deal with China is what I would like to talk about. In the brochure, I have been quite busy trying to oversee the master's degree to students at my university. So it is only just one slide that I would like to show you today, how Japan and the United States try to shape our strategy from the military and on security the purpose that we are allies. So we are trying to jointly trying to respond, and that should be the very foundation and the key axis. And I'm sure there will be a further detailed explanation from the true experts. The United States, who is the world's #1, the military power and economic power, and China, who is a neighbor to Japan, there are differences how to deal with China. That's to say, differences between the U.S. and Japan, because we are in a different position. And such differences must be understood fully by both countries, the U.S. and Japan, if we are to figure out the most appropriate strategy. For Japan, the primary objective is to protect and preserve our sovereignty and freedom, and to avoid the war with China, our neighbor. Absolutely. And to achieve this goal, Japan-US alliance should be the basis, and we should also vamp up our own defense capability. And for risk management purpose, we should try to further develop the bilateral relationship with China, as well as in the multilateral fora. And both the US and Japan should follow their own path. Now, Japan should also independently pursue the two initiatives. Firstly, we need to make efforts for the coexistence and cooperation, because the Xi Jinping administration, as you may know, have the comprehensive security, the military security, economic security, cultural security, societal security, cyber security, as well as science and technology security, the energy security, the nuclear security, and the biological security, and space security, and the South Pole and North Pole security, as well as economic security and military security. That security must be preserved and fully established in every aspect. That is the comprehensive security policy as put forward by the Xi Jinping administration, including the foreign policy as well as economic policy. So we need to work together with the other countries to create a scheme whereby we will be able to have our own the safe coexistence and cooperation, because our national strength and technological capability seems to be on the decline, and our power seems to be on the decline. So compared to the past, how to maintain a good relationship with China seems to be a very difficult task for us. Can we achieve a technological innovation to support ourselves? That would be the key thing. And secondly, to have a win-win international regime to be created so that China will not be able to exercise its arbitrary power over any country, including Japan. So in this project, when I have written my report, I have focused on the judicial arena. Now, the rule by law has been put forward by China 10 years ago. China has been making reference of what France has been doing, trying to address and enhance its power to counter the extraterritorial application of the U.S., the legal the system. So utilizing the Belt and Road, the process, as well as through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China is trying to create a multilateral judicial system, which is more advantageous for them, for the dispute resolution, as well as cybersecurity, as well as cross-border the disputes, as well as trying to prevent the pandemics or any diseases. based upon the differences in political regime or how they go about the rule by the law in trying to train the professionals. Now, in the international relations, there are functional aspects where every area and field seems to be highly specialized and highly complicated. It is not that simplistic anymore. So, such functional aspects are not really taken up by the media, and they are less likely to influence public opinion. So for the countries where they have election, between the politicians and the public, there are more simplistic debate, which enhances mutually the strength. And what do we need to preserve? The values of democracy seems to be being dismantled and collapsing. And that seems to be the focus of attention today of many of the political scientists. Now, in order to prevent such democratic decline, the media needs to turn their eyes and cover the stories, especially how the professionals are looking at the situation. I believe I am within the 7 minutes, right? And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I forgot to explain. This proposal is something that we have distributed. Proposal 1, we start with Proposal 1. And I was really inspired by Proposal 1. And I think that it's important to write this succinctly. And so my proposal is even shorter. So if you read this, you will know that between Japan and US, in order to face China, what is the essence that is referred to? So Kamiya-san next. Professor Kamiya, please. Thank you very much. I'm professor at National Academy of Japan. Thank you very much for including me in this project. I'm honored. Because of COVID, there has been a stop to exchanges between Japan and US, but in the ultimate end, we have this meeting where we are able to see each other and meet with each other. My proposal is Proposal 2. How narrative of defending the rules-based international order can help in winning the soft power competition with China. Japan's security strategy and U.S. security strategy all came out 2020 and 2022 around this time. And the challenge of China is the focus of both. In particular, this focus on rule-based international order and challenges to that. Rule-based international order and challenge to that are points of focus. And in talking about this, and in dealing with this, what is necessary? We want to think about this anew, and that was the thrust of my proposal. Of course, we should not lose to China. So between Japan and U.S., hard power, economic and military power is something that we should have. We should not lose out to China. But that is not sufficient. As long as order is in question, we can talk about outstanding order. If there are a few countries that follow us, then the order is meaningless. So the majority of countries in the world, middle ground countries, the global south countries, between ourselves and China, most of these countries and the trends of these countries are such that we need to attract them so that they're not attracted to China. And that is necessary. And for that, so in terms of soft power, we should not lose out to China between Japan and the U.S. So what is necessary for this purpose? A liberal order is being threatened. So liberalism and democracy versus authoritarianism is something that we tend to talk about in terms of framework. And that is necessary, but we should not just focus on this and make noises about this. If we do this, other countries will be distracted. They will shun that. So we need to be careful about this. For us, China is threatening a rule-based international order. And this issue is the largest challenge in terms of security. And also, China's authoritarian ways of doing things. How do we cope with this? How do we confront this? As liberal and democratic countries, it's the greatest challenge. And that is natural that we see this as a challenge. But we need to notice that a lot of countries in the world don't see this as absolute in terms of ordering of importance of policies. What is most important, rule-based, liberal international order and protecting this, for many countries, it's not the first priority. It's rather more imminent issues that these countries have very flatly stated. That is, more affluent, more convenient lives is important to them. They want to acquire that. And of course, there are differences in degree. Overcoming poverty is on the minds of some countries. There are countries that have overcome poverty, but more affluence and convenience of the kind that advanced industrial countries have is something that they want to enjoy. For these countries, liberalism and order and is something secondary. Affluence is more important to them. And China has found a path to affluence and convenience. And China would show them the way to achieve the same. And so that would be very gratifying to them. Many of these countries, the middle ground countries, are not liberal and they're not democratic. We are liberal and democratic countries, and the loss of these or international order not based on these would something that we view as being extremely negative. But for those countries that are not liberal nor democratic, this is of secondary importance. More important is affluence and convenient lives. To realize this, which country should they depend on? Which is the strongest country that they can depend on? And China is dependent to their eyes in that sense. Now, these countries, are they really sticking to China 100%? No, they know the problems that China poses. These countries are not stupid. The debt trap and the risks of depending on China is something that they realize, but they want to be dependent on China despite this. On the other hand, they want to depend on the liberal and democratic countries where they can at the same time. So China and Japan, US, Europe, they don't want to choose between the two groups. And so we need to know that there is a lot of logic to this. So we are groups of liberal democratic countries, and authoritarian China and Russia are countries that we are competing and confronting and fighting with. But if we scream out too much about liberalism and democratic and confrontation with authoritarianism, there are countries who would say, we don't want to be forced to choose between the two. And Chinese resources are very useful to some countries, and these countries will be chased away from us. They will be attracted to China if we stress this aspect too much. So this is very difficult. This is the difficult part. It's without a doubt that we're competing with authoritarian countries, and we want to come out as a winner. In order to win, we have to use a sensitive narrative. And what we should emphasize is rule-based international order. I think that's what it is. Rather than liberal, rule-based order would be more appealing to the medium-sized and small countries. Rule-based international order, as to what this means, whether it's large countries and small countries, or the strong countries or weak countries, they will not rely on force. They will respect rules in taking action. And post-war United States, when it was absolutely strong, they relatively respected rules in taking action, and that is why we have a situation where there's order. I don't think the U.S. has always abided by rules, but for the amount of power that they have, they were abiding of rules. When you look at China, we don't know whether China will be the same, and that is the point of concern. And this concern is such that there are small countries that want affluence and convenient lives, or small and medium countries want this, but they don't want a country to railroad them through the use of force. And so Japan and the US should check that. And that's an appealing aspect. I've spoken already close to 7 minutes, so I'd like to conclude in about 30 seconds. So in order to protect liberal order, we are engaging in competition, but rule-based is something that we should emphasize as a narrative. I think this would be attractive to a lot of middle ground countries. That's one point. And lastly, in concluding, we cannot win in the competition with China through narrative alone. Going back to where I started, there is a preferable order that we are advocating. There has to be an underpinning force to this. And so in order to win in the soft power competition, we have to have hard power. We should not lose out in the competition for hard power. And not to lose there is very difficult, but we have to do this. Japan and US and present security strategy, I think, is asserting the correct things. That is all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention another point. For this recommendation, this proposal, for the Japanese participants, I'm sure you were readily able to see, but for the English-speaking participants, you can flip over and you can find the English version. Thank you. My name is Sato from Takushoku University. It is a great honor for me to be able to speak together with such an illustrious panel. And although there has been some restraints because of the COVID pandemic, I was so stimulated by the exchanges and discussion with the other experts. Now, what I would like to talk about is what is beyond what Professor Kamiya has mentioned. That rules-based system needs to be rebuilt. What I recommend is we must rebuild our global policy. And what is meant by this is we need to enhance the predictability. Now, there are many fields that we need to enhance and improve on predictability. But in my recommendation, what I have taken up is when we see the fierce competition between US and China over technology, how can we rebuild the policy tools so that global norms and global rules will be observed and adhered to. And this will be something very important in dealing with China. But as you can see with my proposal, it is quite short. It is not that I was able to make it compact, but because of my lack of ability to try to make it more compact, because in this field, especially economic security and technology, the friction and competition, every day there are changes happening, there are developments, and during the COVID the period, there has been pressures rising between US and China, especially on sanctions to be imposed on the technology imports and exports. Now, in confronting China in economy and technology, the direction towards raising the pressure, I believe this is something both Japan and US need to coordinate, and Japan should also take a policy in line with what US is doing. That I fully agree. But when it comes to export control or the trade control or the investment control, in strengthening such control, there are also inherent problems as well, because China is a member of the global economy. And from the global south, China is also being seen as a leader. And China, of course, there are different arguments, but including WTO, China is taking actions, abiding by such international rules. So for the foreign trade and exchange control of the law, which has been the designed to deal with the weapons of mass destruction, if we try to strengthen and enhance such regime, we could be meeting retaliation from China. That's to say, those are subject to the foreign trade and foreign control of the law. Of those who are subjected to such law and sanctions, you need to clearly show that they are doing some malicious acts. Now, looking at China, China is not truly a malignant actor in many ways, and there lies the trap, be it semiconductor or in the other technology areas, or be it in exchange people. If we try to continue to apply pressure unnecessarily, we may anger the China, and with China's own economic statecraft, we may be cornered to an edge, or we will be cornered into a untenable situation. So if we try to apply pressure, we may also have to deal with the reactionary moves. How to go about, as Professor Kamiya has mentioned earlier, how to ensure the hard power for ourselves, and how can we seek coexistence is something we need to think about. Between Japan and the United States, for example, in the semiconductor arena, in the individual sectors, minilateral regimes have been established in trying to apply pressure to China, and between Japan and U.S., trying to strengthen security cooperation. That's to say, try to enhance the response capability of Japan and the United States. There are many endeavors ongoing, but such endeavors, if they are to be pursued separately, that's fine. But we need to have a total coordination of the policy that could be sacrificed. In other words, as a global policy, through the global framework, if you are to address China, we are still trying to create something like this. It is not fully established, so we need some dialogue. And what kind of policy measures would be more appropriate? We need to continue to have a discussion on this and observe how China may react in trying to choose which method would be the most appropriate. So looking at the specific content, what Professor Kojima has suggested, we need to encompass not only the military arena, but non-military spheres as well. So we need to rebuild our global policy in dealing with China. So Japan and the United States need to closely work together so that we will be able to approach the global south together. And for Japan and the United States, both will be able to strengthen each and respective capabilities. And by adopting such policy, you will be able to ensure a new international order, not too adversarial, but to try to bring China perhaps closer to our process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I have to explain once again. You should have receivers, and Eric-san will be speaking in English. Channel 1 is for Japanese, and Channel 2 is for English. Proposal 4 is that of Eric. So, Eric-san, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Watanabe-san, for organizing all of this, keeping us pointed in generally the same direction. I'm honored to be on the panel with such distinguished scholars. I have proposed a track 1.5 dialogue on military priorities for the U.S.-Japan alliance, one that would focus on underfunded priorities. I selected resilience as the particular focus, at least initially, and you'll see that in the title of my proposal. I'll organize my comments today around 4 questions. First, what are track 1.5 dialogues? Second, why should we have a track 1.5 dialogue on military priorities generally? Third, why should we focus on resilience in particular, at least at the outset? And fourth, what form and products would such a dialogue have? So first, starting with what are track 1.5 dialogues, this one is pretty simple. The track 1.5 dialogue format are institutionalized meetings that include both government personnel and non-government scholars and other specialists. There can be a number of motivations for undertaking those dialogues, to tap or get at expertise that may not be present in government, to have a more open dialogue that gets around bureaucratic constraints within the government, or to have a certain type of public impact. And with that, I'll move on to the second question, which is why a track 1.5 dialogue on military priorities in general. As you all know, Chinese military resources are growing much faster than those of Japan and the United States, and the alliance is going to have to be smarter about how it uses those resources. That means developing concepts and force structures that are coherent within the militaries of the United States and Japan, as well as across the two nations. Within both of these systems, in the United States and Japan, there are organizations and individuals responsible for developing plans and priorities that should be coherent. We have civilian oversight in both countries, but procurement and force structure are largely the preserve of individual military services, that is the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and often priorities are driven by bureaucratic needs of the services. That's not an attack on the services or questioning their fundamental motivations. Many military officers, I think, would agree with me on this point. Moreover, there's nothing like an alliance track 1.5 on conventional military issues to ensure that the two countries are executing on a well-integrated set of concepts or strategies. Official dialogues are often affirmations or celebrations of the alliance and don't often produce serious discussions or debates about tough choices. And with that, I'll move on to question 3, which is why specifically a track 1.5 dialogue on underfunded priorities, more specifically one that focuses on resilience. The development of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles has made military assets, particularly fixed assets such as air bases and ports, highly vulnerable to attack. Resilience, or in the Japanese lexicon, kyojinsei, has become a staple of discussions within the alliance and within military circles of both countries. In military terms, we can define resilience as the ability to absorb attack while continuing to operate and produce effects on an adversary. No one really denies the importance of resilience, and for example, we can find it as one of the 7 priorities listed in Japan's 2022 strategic and military documents. Analysts have been working on the problem for a long time, I would say more than 20 years. It's not a new problem, although it's gotten progressively worse over time. And I think almost all analysts who've looked at the problem would agree that a combination of passive and active measures are required in response. And I'll sort of speak to air bases in particular here, but this is generally true across a variety of other areas as well. So passive measures would include things like base hardening, the use of civilian ports and airports, dispersion across those different facilities and beyond them, mobility, and camouflage, concealment, and deception. Active measures are primarily air and missile defenses. So we sort of know what needs to be done, but if you look at what's actually been done and what the program is going forward, it's clear that resilience is the neglected stepchild of the military and badly underfunded. During the 1980s, when the threat was the Soviet Union and the United States got serious for a time about resilience, it built roughly 1,000 hardened aircraft shelters across Asia and Europe. As far as I can tell, exactly 0 have been built since then by the United States. So Korea built some for us, but we have not built any. The Japanese military has been equally bad on this score, not worse, but equally bad with the United States. Although it lists resilience, again, on its list of priorities, it's placed in 7th of 7 places, and there's not much content attached to it. So, for example, rather than building hardened aircraft shelters, the apparent plan for the JASDF, the Air Self-Defense Forces, is to build what they call revetments, or concrete three-sided shelters to provide a degree of protection against ground blast. That's not a great way to defend or protect aircraft that cost $100 million apiece. Also, despite enormous advances in offensive technology, there's been little investment by either military in terms of developing new types of more mobile, ground-based surface-to-air missile defenses. Aircraft have tremendous offensive potential. They're extraordinarily valuable, but to buy them and not defend them makes very little sense. So with that, I'll move on to my last question, which is what form would a track 1.5 take, and what products would it generate? By definition, participants would be drawn from government and non-governmental sectors. That's the definition of a track 1.5. Government participants would, I think, obviously include uniformed military officers as well as individuals from Japan's Ministry of Defense, the US Department of Defense. In the Japanese cases, I think we'd also want other affiliated government actors, those looking at defense issues from within the Ministry of Finance and possibly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the civilian side, I think the idea would be to bring known experts from academia and the think tank world, but even more important would be technical experts and individuals capable of doing some basic mathematical analysis and modeling of these problems. So what would they produce? In this case, since meetings would address, I think, known problems that are nevertheless underfunded and not being addressed, the ultimate audience might be congressional and diet actors, so people who can actually bring about changes to the internal dynamics. And I think, therefore, the right product is a public one. Those could be 2-page memos, since I'm told congressmen don't read any more than 2 pages. But I think backed by longer papers of 10 or 20 pages, and I'd expect 4 or 5 of these a year. So there it is, track 1.5 dialogue on underfunded military priorities, offered actually with a bit of optimism despite lack of action to date. I think defense issues are getting a lot more attention now, and there's some hope that the dynamics that have to date produced suboptimal results can change going forward. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Eric-san. Now, the following presentation will be recommendation. The recommendation 5 is Professor Yamaguchi, and recommendation 6, my Professor Nakamura, but I will be summarizing later on, so we would like to skip those recommendations. And moving on to number 7, I would like to ask Nicolas Szechenyi to present.
It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to join this distinguished panel. I'm going to build on Kamiya sensei's excellent presentation. My proposal focuses on how to generate and sustain momentum for networking among like-minded countries in the region to manage strategic competition with China. As Kamiya sensei mentioned in his presentation, both the United States and Japan have identified strategic competition with China as a major priority in their respective national security strategies. And they also point out that coordination with like-minded countries is key to success over the long term. Japan refers to this as multi-layered security cooperation. The Biden administration uses a description of weaving fabric, coming up with different types of relationships, capitalizing on different strengths of allies and partners to manage this long-term competition with China. This multi-layered structure, or this weaving of fabric, comes in many forms. The obvious one is bilateral alliance relationships, which have featured prominently in international relations of Asia, of course. You also have regional institutions and global institutions that the US and Japan and other like-minded countries try to utilize to shape rules and norms in the global order. But I think the most prominent dynamic in this region going forward is going to be what we call mini-lateralism, informal groupings of like-minded countries which try to coordinate on a variety of issues to maintain regional stability and prosperity. Of late, we've had many developments. The AUKUS relationship, US, Australia, the United Kingdom. We have a longer history of US, Japan, Australia coordination on security dynamics in the region. Just last year, with the Camp David Summit, we have the US, Japan, South Korea relationship evolving with respect to security cooperation in Northeast Asia, but also a variety of other issues related to economic security and ultimately shaping rules and norms in the region. We also have the Quad, which is an arrangement of the US, Japan, India, and Australia, also designed to cover a wide variety of issues from climate and infrastructure development to regional security cooperation. There are many. It's very hard to schedule formal mechanisms. There are only so many days in a calendar year. But I think there's room for a fourth informal coordinating mechanism, and that's a quadrilateral between the US, Japan, Australia, and South Korea. And I think so for the following reason. South Korea is coming out of a period of strategic isolation. President Yoon has made a conscious decision to not only strengthen the US-South Korea alliance, but strengthen the relationship with Japan, and also network more closely with other countries in the region. South Korea unveiled an Indo-Pacific strategy, very similar to those of Japan and United States and other countries, clearly eager to play a role in shaping regional rules and norms and coordinate initiatives and priorities with other like-minded states. Like many other states, including Japan, on the front line of the China challenge, South Korea is trying to balance deterrence to discourage aggressive behavior with interaction with China because of a history of economic interdependence. So this is not some containment strategy of China. In fact, South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy states specifically that it's an inclusive approach to shaping regional rules and norms. Nonetheless, it's quite clear that under the Yoon government, the strategic priority has shifted from strengthening the relationship with the United States and maintaining a close economic relationship with China to really trying to become more connected with other like-minded states in the region. So what could the US, Japan, South Korea, and Australia do together? Quite a lot. We can start with capacity building for states in Southeast Asia. For example, maritime domain awareness, which is an urgent priority in a country like the Philippines. All four countries have an interest and have stated an interest in working with a country like the Philippines to enhance stability in Southeast Asia. You have a wide variety of issues with respect to technology and economic security, which is featuring prominently in the other minilateral mechanisms I mentioned and could be carried forth further in this sort of quadrilateral networking environment. You also have official development assistance. And this gets to Kamiya Sensei's point about how we address the global South on its own terms. All four countries have keen interest and experience in providing development assistance in Southeast Asia to the Pacific Islands, but it's not necessarily coordinated. They don't all have to be joint initiatives, but they should be coordinated to be effective. And effectiveness is also important with respect to messaging to the global South. And this, I think, is very important. Last week in Washington, the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, gave a speech about U.S.-China relations. And he talked specifically about the Global South and said that the United States and its allies and partners can't just engage the Global South in reaction to what China is doing or to try to overtly compete with China's initiatives with respect to development in that part of the world, but rather have to come up with what he described as a value proposition. What value are we offering the developing world? What public goods can we provide? Why should the Global South want to interact with this network of like-minded democracies in Asia? And so we need to develop a positive narrative for the Global South on its own terms, and we need to coordinate it in order for it to be effective. So this coordination process is critical. We have to coordinate joint initiatives, or at least become more aware of our respective initiatives across the region. We need to talk more about providing public goods, especially for the Global South. And ultimately, we need to talk about the values and the norms that we care about to maintain a rules-based order. All of those things are part of a strategy to manage strategic competition with China. And I think we should be doing so with South Korea in this period where we're so strategically aligned and ready to meet this challenge over the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Nicolas-san. Proposal 8 is such that Emilia Solis is not here in Japan, so I will talk about it later on. So we'd like to move to Proposal 9. Professor Tsugami, please. Thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. What I have to talk about overlaps with what Sato-san has said. Let me talk about in specific terms, however. The advanced technology, AI, and semiconductors, and transfer to China, and regulation on these is something that I'm focusing on. U.S., the Western countries, Japan included, the advanced countries are regulating transfer of this kind of technology to China. Economic competition is the way some view it, but when it comes to chips and AI, the performance is such that it will be a determining factor in future weapons performance. In the narrow sense of the word, security and defense, this regulation is imposed, and the necessity of this regulation is obvious to anyone. However, China consumes 30% of the world's semiconductor. It's the largest market in Japan. We're not strong in terms of semiconductor manufacturing, but manufacturing equipment is very good. The 30% or 40% of the manufacturing equipment goes to China. So the semiconductors of the West has maintained a lead up until today. The sales and revenue of this industry and R&D investment by these industries have underpinned our leading position. And so if the industry declines and wanes, we will not be able to maintain the lead. That will be the situation we'll be faced with. So it's obvious that regulation is required, but at the same time, the cost and benefit of regulation, we have to compare both and consider that. It's a relatively difficult issue. So in that respect, in the report, there are things that I did not write about, and I have 3 concerns. Firstly, to the regulations of the West, China is beginning to counterattack, respond, and defend. China has started that. There's the defensive aspect and offensive aspect. In terms of the defense aspect, they're moving to domestically produced semiconductors at a great speed. Not to use domestically produced semiconductors is what they're advocating. and they have subsidized R&D investment, and so the entire nation is moving in that direction. Automobiles, household appliances, they are instructing people to use domestically produced goods. So the Western semiconductor market is shrinking because of this. In terms of the offensive aspect, the Chinese supply chain, and to make the world dependent on this, that is the objective. And with a view to doing this, starting with EV, they're trying to control and dominate the world market, and that is becoming clear. EVs and solar panels is what we're seeing at the moment. But going forward, the old type of semiconductors in this area as well, China will try to attempt to dominate the world market. That is what I think. And the second concern is such that the Western countries are also trying to introduce the supplying capabilities in their own countries, and there's a competition to provide subsidies. We don't know whether this attempt will succeed. Maybe several trillions of yen will be wasted. It might happen. But if they succeed, bringing home the supplying capacity in the semiconductor area, there will be excess production. And so the old semiconductors will be produced in China, and there'll be an oversupply. When it comes to advanced semiconductors, this will be done in advanced industrialized countries. And so semiconductor industry will no longer be lucrative. And so there'll be no R&D, and people will not be attracted to semiconductor manufacturing. And that is what I'm concerned about. And the third concern is last year in October, Huawei revived in the high-end smartphone market. It's a very advanced chips that they're using, and the U.S. has been greatly shocked by this. There was an attempt to narrow the regulation. The small yard, high fence approach was taken up until now. And with this as a motto, they have regulated. But the nano chip shock, after this was presented by China, 7 nano chip shock, they're talking about broader yards now. So 30%, 40% of the sales were sold to China by Japanese manufacturers. They'll be suffering, and business stability will be lost. And after the fact, people will negate what the industries have been doing up until now. So when you think about this, a semiconductor-related regulation vis-a-vis China is very difficult in order to try to balance that. So compared to what we initially thought, it's far more difficult. In particular, as Professor Kamiya has said, the third world, the developing countries are countries that we have to attract. We have to increase allies. So high cost, strong regulation on the part of the West would result in the West being isolated from the world. There's such a concern. The Western economies are less than half of the world's economy. And if the countries that account for more than half of the world's economy shun the Western countries, the West will be isolated. The market economies and globalization efficiency first has given rise to problems. That's a fact. But if regulation is too strong, then we will see results that we did not expect and we did not intend. Having said that, I think that decoupling is a broad trend in world history, and there's no way of stopping it. I have given up on this, stopping decoupling. But outrageous things may happen. Escalation and retaliation will happen. There'll be tit for tat between the West and China. And if that happens, we won't know what we're doing anymore. And eventually, both countries will escalate their regulations and they will counteract, and they might have to engage in negotiations to pull back on these regulations on both sides. That is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tsugami-san. Now, the next proposal will be Proposal 10 from Mr. James Schoff.
Abe-san, for the opportunity to be a part of this project, and thank you all for coming today. Before I talk about the proposal, actually, can we keep the lights on until the end? Because I'll use, I don't think, thank you. Because I won't use the slide until the very end. But before I talk about the proposal, I'd like to highlight how U.S. policy and strategy vis-a-vis China has evolved, because I don't think it's as straightforward as it's often portrayed. That is that we tried to make China a responsible stakeholder internationally, but it didn't work out. And then because I think, and as you've heard, shaping pragmatic and effective strategy toward China connects in large part to how we coordinate on economic security policies. I'll outline one way that I think our two governments can improve the policy coordination process. So first, on recent history, the U.S. has had a few pivotal China policy debates during the 20th century, such as the 1940s to support Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist movement in China, in 1970s when President Nixon decided to switch U.S. recognition of China to the PRC, and the pursuit of what some called deep integration with China via normalized trade relations and China's entry into the World Trade Organization at the end of the 1990s. Interestingly, it was the same Clinton administration that effectively pushed deep integration with China across the finish line, was also the first to propose an Economic Security Council in the White House, eventually became the National Economic Council, to help bolster U.S. competitiveness. So getting closer economically with China and strengthening economic security in that era was not mutually exclusive. Today, however, it's very different, with the debate now being between de-risking on the one hand versus more strategic decoupling on the other. And there is kind of a Biden-Trump split on this. With Biden, you'll get more de-risking. With Trump, you'll probably move more in the decoupling direction. So it took only a decade for deep integration experiment to begin to fall apart. But the progression of this deterioration is interesting to consider. The first problem was political. Retroactive studies of that era say that of the new trade and investment patterns with China resulted in nearly 1 million manufacturing job losses in the United States from 1999 to 2001, just 3 years. In Ohio, 400,000 manufacturing jobs were lost. Now, as a nation, economically, it was manageable. It was not an economic problem. It was a political problem for those states and those communities, and politicians noticed. Greater scrutiny of Chinese trade practices in the next decade then coincided with growing disenchantment with China among the U.S. private sector, with persistent market barriers in China, intellectual property theft, Chinese subsidies to domestic competitors. So the greatest U.S. cheerleaders of deep integration stopped being so vocal around this time, right around 2015, when Beijing launched Made in China 2025 and its civil military fusion initiatives. So now it was an economic issue and a military issue on top of this political issue. And then more recently, the emergence of digital authoritarianism worries, China's Digital Silk Road initiative have added an ideological component on top of these other three. So to some extent, U.S. policymakers focus on different aspects of economic security when it comes to China. And that makes a difference in how we decide on export controls, subsidies for U.S. industry, protections for labor. These are very conflicting components of the economic security debate in the United States. So economic security policy formation in the United States is fragmented, stovepiped, despite a deliberate effort to use the NSC as an interagency coordinator on economic security. And the definition of economic security is expanding, deeper into data governance issues, all the way to de minimis trade rules and Amazon packages coming over from China that are less than $800 in value, that some policymakers now want to have access to and require new regulations. So to manage the complexity with the EU, we have the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. That's a 3+3 approach with USTR involved. With India and South Korea, we have an NSC-led forum on technology, critical and emerging technology. With Israel, we have NSC-led, but the State Department plays an important role. And with Japan, we have the EPCC, or the Economic Policy Consultative Committee, State and Commerce with the Foreign Ministry and METI. So the EPCC has been around now for 2 years. It's an improvement on where we were before. But so far, it has not really demonstrated an ability to deliver value to other departments and ministries who all have a stake in this process. They're still relying on the counterpart relationships for outbound investment restriction, determination, and other types of communications issues and transportation and the like. So my proposal, and here, if we can move the lights down here, is to try to improve the interagency coordination. We'll get there. There we go. Because my Japanese embassy friends in Washington tell me it's very hard right now, if not impossible, to understand how the US government will reconcile all these competing economic security policy efforts, balancing Congress, business interests, and various departments. So I like this idea of EPCC embassy coordination teams, where the ambassador would be designated to lead this effort, and the political and commercial ministers in the embassies would lead these teams that would be made up of their embassy staff. Because the embassy is the most tight-knit yet comprehensive interagency coordinating body that exists with a unified mission, the bilateral relationship. And they have links back to all of the relevant departments and offices for all these different types of areas. And each embassy team would have a link to the NSC in the host country, along with their counterpart agencies, and the ambassadors could meet once or twice a year to confer about how they're supporting the 2+2, the economic 2+2 component. So they would supplement and support the state, commerce, MOFA, METI activities, but it brings more of a whole of government approach in this regard. So that's the proposal that I have. Thank you. But we can talk about that in questions so we'll do our best on that front.
Thank you very much for that. And the remaining proposals I'd like to address and talk about. On page 5, proposal 5, Professor Noboru Yamaguchi is in the hall, so questions should be directed to him. Japan-U.S. cooperation to protect the southern flank of Japan. Between Japan-U.S. defense cooperation has progressed a great degree, and people understand that. And there are lots of Japanese papers on that, and it's been reported by the media. Of course, the southwestern islands around Okinawa, enhancing capacity and denial capacity. The denial capacity is a bit different from deterrence capacity. Even if there's a military attack, to have the ability to think that would not be effective, to reduce the willingness of enemy countries to do that, and Japan, U.S. To cooperate in that regard. And Japan has a lot of counter-attack capabilities. A standoff counter-attack capabilities is what Japan has declared that it would enhance. On the U.S. side, the Southwestern Islands, the West is something that we are working on. A new regimen to be introduced and to enhance existent capabilities. Of course, the U.S. would liaise with the Self-Defense Force in order to do that. And Philippines, Australia, and UK, France, and India. We should be talking to these partners properly. Nicholas-san's proposal has talked about this. There's some overlap. It's an extension of what we're doing now. We need to enhance this further. And if you could turn a page, Proposal 6, that's Susumu Nakamura-san's proposal. Collective defense capabilities and counterattack capacity to strengthen that. And legal changes are being made, but there are still some legal restrictions. Nakamura-san's a specialist in jurisprudence and law. So as to what to do about this, I think it leads to this proposal. A new U.S.-Japan joint procedure to be adopted. If there's something that occurs, contingency in Taiwan, if there's something that happens, to have this properly drafted would make clear what the legal restrictions are. And if something happens, if we say that because of legal restrictions we can't do anything about it, that's a problem. So it won't lead to denial capacity either. So in Japan, we have constitutional restrictions. That's the third paragraph in the document. The collateral damage and the scope of collateral damage is of concern here. In Japan, we have to be stringent in delineating this. And so if we have to do something, would that work? We have to do things properly. So between Japan and the U.S., we need to work out what we should do. And that is the thrust of the proposal. Jumping to Proposal 8, that's Mireya Solis's proposal. The regional digital economy rules to champion that between Japan and the United States. And it overlaps with other people's proposals. And what this is that Japan and U.S. should properly look at the regional economies, new trends, new direction. Otherwise, no one will follow us. For example, in economies, there are three important challenges. Mireya-san talks about this. Japan and other CPTPP member nations and future members. China wishes to join. And high standard open digital economy rules should not be sacrificed with the introduction of new members. And data flow freedom, source code protection, data localization. There are restrictions related to digital rules. These should not be too stringent. The rules have to be consistent, otherwise no one will be able to join. Or China may introduce a completely new set of rules. And unfortunately, moving to number 3, the U.S. has withdrawn from TPP, and then the IPEF, a new framework, including digital economy, is being advocated. But no one is really forward-looking about this, and there's no trend of countries wanting to join. So IPEF, especially Southeast Asia countries, to appeal to them. Between Japan and U.S., there needs to be positive efforts to formulate rules, and we need to be forward-looking. That is what Mirai-san talks about. I'm not an expert in this field, so perhaps I have not explained fully. But fortunately, there's a document. And it's not just Mireya-san. Those who are here have things that they have not said in the proposal, but there's a working paper. The link is in the very back of the proposals, and in Sasakawa there's an INA, a website called INA. It's in English and Japanese. So if you read this, you will see what we really wanted to say. And lastly, my own proposal, that's number 11. I wanted to add something, but I felt that it's best not to add anything. Having listened to what you heard today, Japan and U.S. Vis-a-vis China, or in countries other than China, to engage these countries, security, military, economic security, and the economy itself. And we need to work on the mutual interactions of all of these. So we need to work on this as a grand strategy. It's not an easy thing to do. So Japan and the U.S. already has worked on security and economic security in the 2+2. There's the economic 2+2 that Jim mentioned. EPCCC, Economic Policy Consultative Committee, that's the economic 2+2. To make this function well is very difficult. But unless these function properly, as all of the panelists pointed out, people will wonder what the U.S. and Japan want to do. We might chase China into a corner, and they might not abide by the rules, or they might create a completely different world, and the global South may not follow us. So that might be the consequence. So here we need to think properly. And in order to think about policies vis-a-vis China, security is not sufficient. The economic security is not sufficient. Economy itself is alone is not sufficient. We have to include all. And the great framework is something that I refer to, the grand framework. And as Jim said, in the actual adjustment, it's not easy. So the embassy team perhaps should be working on this, and thoughts lead to this. And so this is the proposal this time. And as you know, it's very broad, and the sectors are different for the different proposals, and there's a reason for this. All are necessary. The individual proposers' names are indicated here. It's hard for everyone to agree on this across different expertise. But on this theme, we have gotten together and we have discussed and we influenced each other to put together this proposal. And so that was the import of this proposal this time. So I'd like to use the remaining time for a panel, use this time for a panel discussion and entertaining questions from the floor. Please state your name and affiliation, but there may be a problem. So if you would like to remain anonymous, that's fine. And there's a camera. And so if you don't want to be videoed, please do not face the camera. So from the floor, we would like to be entertaining questions. We'd like to have you raise hands, and we'll bring over the microphone to you. And no one wants to be the first to ask questions. So just for practice, I'd like to raise a question to the panel.
Now, it would not be interesting if I asked the same question to everyone. So first of all, I would like to ask the U.S. participants, the three of you, first of all. Now, as Jim has been pointing out, the Trump administration and Biden administration, there are big differences. Now, going forward? Would it be Trump administration again, or will the Biden administration continues? Now, vis-a-vis strategy over China, if there is a difference, how to respond? So very simply, I would like to ask a question. Anybody who would care to respond? What may be the difference in policy, and how should we respond?
That avenue. Just briefly, so I've been doing a little research on what are potential Trump officials, future Trump officials, if Trump were to win, what are they writing, what are they saying or testifying about on Capitol Hill? And their direction is definitely more toward a strategic decoupling, kind of a greater sense of threat from China, a concern of a lack of strength of the U.S. response. So the China Select Committee, the House Select Committee on China policy or relations with the vis-a-vis the Communist Party is pushing to put China on a different tariff schedule. Bob Lighthizer, who was the former USTR, who would probably be in a second Trump administration, has recommended revoking permanent normal trade relations with China. And Trump just yesterday talked about 60% tariffs on goods from China. So there would be a much stronger reaction, I would expect. I know there's some concern in my friends in Japan that maybe Trump would cut a deal with China and try to, if they balanced the trade, if there was trade balance and China agreed to give Trump some economic benefits, maybe the U.S. would stop paying attention in East Asia and vis-a-vis Taiwan. I don't think it would go that far because I think the concern about China is too strong within the Republican side and even on many of the Democrats. But the volatility would definitely be greater. And then on the Biden side, I think they would try to continue this de-risking, but we want to do the really small yard if possible and the high fence and try to have as much normal trade in other non-strategic areas with China as possible.
Eric-san next, please.
I agree with Jim. I think broadly we're unlikely to see certainly softening towards China. It may become tougher, but I would imagine broad continuity in China policy, in part because of sort of congressional opinion and congressional constraints, and in part because of Trump's own previous positions and inclinations. I would also expect a degree of continuity in Japan policy, although I think nothing can be guaranteed under a Trump administration, really, as far as continuity is concerned. My chief concern would be other areas of the world. Trump's made no secret of his deep suspicion of alliances and his desire to, I think, undermine them and to enable the United States to escape from certain obligations, particularly in Europe. So I think over the last several years, we've seen a very significant evolution of European policy positions. Their attitudes towards China have come around very significantly towards one that's more compatible with U.S. positions, Japanese positions, and others. But I would imagine, under a Trump presidency, we're likely to see very dramatic change in U.S.-Europe policy. I would imagine that Trump would probably try to get us out of support for Ukraine, whether or not he can succeed in that endeavor. And I think that sort of opens a lot of uncertainty and questions about how the Europeans are likely to react, whether Europe will become more divided, and whether Europe's position on Asia, whether Europe will become more self-absorbed and less able really to play a significant role in Asia. So I think even if we're looking at Asia policy, there could be profound implications to a Trump presidency. And that's really just a wild guess on my part.
ニコラスさんありますかね。
Nick-san, anything to add, please?
Well, I would just say that if there's a political transition in the United States, it's probably going to become harder for Japan to maintain a nuanced strategy vis-a-vis China. The Biden administration, as we've heard, has definitely focused on protecting sensitive technologies, and there's been a robust dialogue with Japan and others about that. But I think there's also an understanding or a recognition of the interest that Japan and other countries in this region have in maintaining interaction with China and stability vis-a-vis diplomatic ties. If we have a political transition, if there's another Trump administration, I think that dialogue is going to become increasingly difficult, and Japan might be faced with a dynamic where the expectation will be on one side of the ledger, which is pressure and deterrence rather than balancing deterrence and interaction. The other thing I'd say is more about the relationship between Japan and the United States. And there, I think the story that Japan brings is exactly the same as it was when Abe Shinzo managed the transition to the Trump administration, and that is Japan is investing more in defense, its own capabilities, strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance, networking with other countries in the region, in essence, taking a greater leadership role in the realm of international security. That message was very well received then, very well received by the current administration, and I think it will animate the way a new administration in the U.S. Will think about Japan and Asia strategy. So that's very positive, and I think Japan should just keep doing what it's doing because its strategy is very practical, very logical, and clearly in U.S. interests. And I think there's bipartisan recognition of that fact in the United States.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much for that. I believe there are questions on the Japanese side, and maybe the audience is ready to ask questions. So we'd like to entertain questions from the floor. Please indicate to whom the question is directed. If you direct it to all of the panelists, because we have such a large number, that will take up all the time. So if you could focus on a certain panelist in raising your questions, please raise your hand. We'll start with the person on the left, seated at the very front.
American experts. Let me ask you two questions. One is, do you believe universal values, like Biden administration said that the democracy versus autocracy, but do you think American-style democracy or values may prevail all over the world? That's my first question. The second question is, what is your take that Japan has started to build up a new generation jet fighter together with UK and Italy instead of US? I'm afraid that US companies are not willing to share cutting-edge technology with Japanese companies. That must be the background. But what is your take of such a movement? Thank you. I forgot to tell my name. My name is Shikata from Mitsubishi Company. Thank you.
じゃあアメリカ側の方3人が2人やるとちょっと時間なくなるんで。
The three U.S. participants, perhaps if you speak about everything, if you could just pick up one question from the questions he's raised and pick an answer.
And I'll leave the other. On universal values and American-style democracy, I don't think American-style democracy, frankly, right now it's not working very well, is necessarily the answer for other countries in the world. But I do think that there is a fundamental debate or struggle going on in terms of what kind of international order do we want? Can we coexist with China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, the way that they are operating at this time, I don't think we need to turn them into democracies, but we need to strengthen collaboration among free nations and democracies around the world so that we are able to maintain our democracy the way we want to, without outside interference, without invasion, without coercion. So I think it's about defending our way of life, not necessarily trying to spread our beliefs elsewhere.
I'll just address the second question. So the second question is on Japan's next generation fighter. That will be ostensibly a sixth generation fighter designed with the UK, with BAE, and I believe an Italian partner. There's an international market for aviation fighter aircraft. Those are great partners. It's no secret that the United States, Lockheed, has not been terribly forthcoming with technology on fighter aircraft and in other areas. So, you know, I think from our perspective, all we can do is wish Japan luck and success in that endeavor. I would say, I'd add one thing, which is this is going to be Japan's sixth generation fighter. The US will have its own. It's the NGAD, Next Generation Air Dominance fighter. I have heard numbers about what the budget for that looks like. People have talked about hundreds of millions of dollars. So current jet fighters cost about $100 million apiece. These will be hundreds of millions of dollars. They will have great results in the air. None of that matters if they can't be protected on the ground. We're doing nothing to protect them on the ground, right? So in our war games, the US and Japan lose hundreds of aircraft in every single game. 90 to 95% of those are lost on the ground. So it really doesn't matter how good your fighter is. There's no point in buying fighters unless you have a plan for protecting them. So I'm sorry, that's goes a little bit beyond the question, but you know, it's a very important point with regard to air forces. Thanks.
それでは今度日本
We'd like to restrict questions to those directed to the Japanese panelists. Maybe the person at the extreme right on this side will bring over the microphone to you. Sato, former SDF, and China and US, Japan on one side. We believe the battleground will be Japan and Taiwan. So this should be avoided as much as possible. Then it all comes to soft power. The United States is a Christian country, and we have a multitude of religions here in Japan. And China is a totalitarian, is atheist. And within the world, there are countries that believe in a multitude of gods. So I think we have some commonalities between these countries. I'd like to address my question to Kamiya sensei. I was taken off guard. Of course, it's the diversity of Japan's culture that is polytheism. And for Japan wished to enter into the West, and there were some setbacks. Within Asia, there were some models presented ourselves, successful models, and there were models which were not so successful. And so maybe my question alone will not be sufficient. Would anyone else care to answer?
Professor Kamiya, yes, I was not on guard myself. Religion is not my expertise, so I may say something totally idiotic. But the Japanese religion, the mainstream religion in this country, as compared to religion in other countries, it is perhaps excessively tolerant and receptive to the other religions. I am not really ardent about religion myself, but when I was in kindergarten at Kansai, there was a famous temple which was managing this kindergarten. And this kindergarten, this is not a secret, but it was called Saidaiji Kindergarten in Nara City. And Saidaiji Temple the top person on Shingon sect of Buddhism. He was the president of the kindergarten. During the Christmas, he will be the Saidaiji Temple, the top priest. But then he would very happily become Santa Claus during the Christmas. He would wear the beard and the hat and everything. And I think that religion must be tolerant about the other religions as well. But looking at the various religions all over the world, they're too strict and too exclusive about the other religions. Maybe they should learn from Japan. But Japanese religion seems to be perhaps overly tolerant. So perhaps we could make the efforts and play a role to try to mitigate the conflict between the religions. So this will be the one last question. So the person there, if you could be aware that the time is limited. My name is Mukai from the Military Studies Group. I have a question to Professor Kamiya. To the liberals, that you need to have rules. But then, for the rules may be different. The reason why I say this is looking at the war ongoing in Ukraine. It is more of a indiscriminate type of war. But the Western countries, I'm not really sure whether they are trying to be neutral, but from the indiscriminate point of view, there are more UN-led type of regime, but it would mean more Western-led the system, rather than continental, but it would be more European and the United States. So when we say Anglo-American, they are trying to break the sovereignty. But China, on the other hand, they don't want interference into their domestic affairs, be it the Uyghur and so forth. But if you maintain that kind of Anglo-American system, I don't think Russia will be able to respond. And now it is very complicated and very difficult issue. I wanted to avoid that. One thing, China, looking at the UN-centered system, China is more receptive. That is to say, well, this is borrowing from the China expert. And I have also made a research myself. And what I learned is that the US-led order, China is trying to counteract that. The China dislikes that. There was a high-ranking official of a diplomatic corps, as mentioned in his speech. There are three elements. The Western-led values is one big factor, and the US-led military alliance is another factor. And third is UN system and the subsidiary institutions. That the third, China will welcome that. But what the US says as a universal value, as China says, what they say as universal value, and the order based upon the UN-led the military, the system, those two can never, ever be accepted. That is the position of China. But the United Nations, China is a member of the Security Council, permanent member, and this is a little bit different from reality. But what the China asserts as a fact, China says that ever since the establishment of the United Nations, China has always been the leader. But initially, it was more China, more Taiwan rather than China, who was leading in the United Nations. But China asserts that it was China right from the beginning, because for United Nations, they would be more accommodative, and Xi Jinping have always continued to say so. But then Russia has done something egregious, but China cannot really cut off Russia. So it is more difficult for China to try to maintain the UN system. I'm not sure whether this is an answer, but when you say rule-based order, for example, in 2021, when Biden administration has been started in Alaska, there was a top level at the meeting of the 4 leaders of the U.S. and China. And John Yeti has mentioned that the U.S. says the international order, that is your order. So what he is saying that China is skeptical of this kind of order. So because if we assert rules-based, China will always try to counter that. So more recently, we are saying the rule of law-based order. And I'm not really sure whether this is a good answer or not.
皆さん本当に親
We're very close to each other, the panel members, but even on stage, they're really outstanding. And could we have a warm round of applause for the panelists? And also, thank you very much to the audience for coming to this hall despite the inclement weather. And thank you for the very good questions raised. And we'd like to conclude the panel discussion at this point. Thank you very much to all. I'm sure we could continue this discussion for much longer, but we'd like to conclude as time is up. The panelists will be leaving us. Thank you very much to those on stage. We thank you very much for coming, taking time out of your busy schedules. Please do not leave anything behind.